welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. From the bloodstained journal of Logan Delorme, found in the ruins of the Delorme Ranch, Brewster County, Texas. Day 1, September 15th. The altar stone wept poison into Texas soil, just like Grandpier's warnings said it would. I should have listened to the old man's stories. Should have paid attention when he traced those ward carvings with his gnarled fingers, telling me about the things that sleep beneath our land. But I was 22 then, fresh out of college with a history degree and too much pride to believe in backwoods superstitions. Now I'm 35, and the stone is bleeding. It started 3 days ago. I was checking the fence line on the north pasture when I caught that smell. Sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in a funeral parlor. The cattle wouldn't graze within 50 yards of the spot. Smart animals. Smarter than me, apparently. The stone sits in a natural depression about 200 yards from the old oak where Grandpier buried his prize bull back in '78. Always thought it was just another chunk of limestone thrust up from the earth, common as dirt in this part of Texas. But when I crouched down to examine it yesterday morning, I saw the carvings, spirals and angles cut deep into the rock, filled with something that looked like dried blood. The grooves were too precise, too deliberate to be natural erosion, and they were warm to the touch, despite the morning chill that had frost covering everything else. That's when I remembered Grandpier's journal. I found it in the old cedar chest in the attic, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with leather cord. His handwriting was careful, precise, the penmanship of a man who understood the weight of words. The entries dated back to 1952, when he first bought this land from the Comanche County Bank. "The stone marks where something sleeps," he wrote. "Great-grandmere Marie told me the old ones knew to keep it quiet. Blood wakes it. Blood feeds it. The ward carvings around the property, they're not decoration. They're barriers." I spent the rest of yesterday afternoon walking the property line, looking for those ward carvings. Found them carved into fence posts, hidden under decades of paint and weathering. Intricate symbols that meant nothing to me but everything to the man who carved them. Some were split by weather, others nearly worn smooth. All of them faced inward, toward the center of our land, toward the bleeding stone. This morning, I went back with my camera and a measuring tape. The smell was stronger, thick enough to taste. The black ichor, because that's what it was, not blood, something far worse, had pooled in the carved spirals overnight. When I touched it with a stick, it hissed like acid on metal. The stone was warm now, not just warm, hot. I could feel the heat through the soles of my boots when I stood on it. The carvings pulsed with a rhythm that reminded me of a heartbeat, slow and steady and wrong. I took pictures, measured the symbols, compared them to the sketches in Grandpier's journal. Perfect matches, every one. The old man had documented this exact stone, these exact carvings 70 years ago. But in his drawings, the grooves were empty, clean limestone channels waiting for something to fill them. Now they're full. I tried calling Zachary, but cell service has been spotty since the storms last week. The landline to the main house just gives me static. I'll drive into town tomorrow, talk to Jacob at the sheriff's office. He's level-headed, been dealing with strange things on the plains long enough to know when something's worth investigating. But part of me wonders if I should be warning people instead of investigating. Grandpier's journal gets darker as it goes on. Entries about livestock dying near the stone, about the earth splitting open in long, weeping wounds, about something clawing its way up from deep places, hungry for blood and pain. The drilling company came through in '53. One entry reads, "Wanted to survey for oil. I ran them off with the shotgun, but they left their equipment. found strange marks in the ground where they'd been testing. The stone bled for 3 days after. Drilling company. That phrase keeps echoing in my head as I write this, because there's been talk in town about new surveys, new equipment coming through. Jackson Rousseau's been asking questions about mineral rights, about who owns what under the ground. Said his employer's interested in the geological formations out here. The cattle are gone now. Found their bones this morning, scattered in a wide circle around the stone. Clean white bones, stripped of flesh and sinew, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. The marrow had been sucked out, leaving hollow tubes that whistled when the wind passed through them. I'm going to check the ward carvings again tonight. Make sure they're still intact. Grandpierre was specific about that. The wards have to be maintained, kept clean and sharp. If they fail, if the barriers fall, I don't want to think about what happens then. The stone is humming now. A low, subsonic vibration that makes my teeth ache and my vision blur. The ichor isn't just pooling anymore. It's flowing, following channels I can't see, spreading out from the stone in arterial patterns that pulse with the same rhythm as the carvings. I need to warn people. That's my duty now, the burden Grandpierre left me. But first, I need to understand what we're dealing with. How deep does this go? How far has it spread? And most importantly, can it be stopped? The sun's setting behind the hills, painting the sky the color of old blood. Time to check the wards. Time to see if the barriers our ancestors built can hold against whatever's waking up beneath our feet. Tomorrow I'll drive into town, talk to Jacob, find Zachary, get some answers about this drilling company. But tonight I'll do what Grandpierre taught me to do. I'll stand watch over the sleeping things and pray they stay asleep a little longer. The stone is bleeding faster now. The smell is getting stronger. And somewhere deep in the earth, something is stirring. God help us all. Day 4, September 18th. The earth screamed as poison veins carved through our land. I found Zachary at dawn, standing in the north pasture with a gas can and a box of matches. He was staring at the broken ward carvings on the fence post, his face pale as cemetery marble. The symbols our great-great-grandmother had carved into the cedar were split down the middle, bleeding sap that looked too dark, too thick to be natural. How long? He asked without looking at me. 3 days since I found the stone bleeding. Maybe longer. I watched him pour gasoline over the ruined ward, the fumes shimmering in the morning air. Zachary, what are you doing? What Grandpierre should have done 70 years ago. His voice was steady, but his hands shook as he struck the match. Burn it all. Start over. Maybe fire will cleanse what blood has poisoned. The flames caught fast, racing along the gasoline trails he'd laid around the broken post. For a moment, I thought it might work. The fire burned clean and bright, consuming the corrupted wood with a hungry roar. But as the smoke cleared, I saw the truth. The ward carvings were gone, but the damage was done. Where the post had stood, a crack ran deep into the earth. Not a normal fissure from drought or settling. This was something else. Something deliberate. The edges of the crack wept the same black ichor that pooled in the bleeding stone, and the smell that rose from it made my stomach turn. Sweet Jesus, Zachary whispered. Logan, what did we do? Before I could answer, the ground shuddered. Not an earthquake, I felt those before. This was different, rhythmic, like something massive taking its first breath deep beneath our feet. The crack widened. 6 inches. A foot. 2 feet. The black ichor flowed faster now, spreading across the dry grass in arterial patterns that pulsed with that same sickening heartbeat. Where it touched, the grass withered and died, leaving scorched earth that looked like infected wounds. We need to get to the house, I said, grabbing Zachary's arm. Call Jacob. Call the county emergency. The phone lines are down. He pulled away, staring at the spreading fissure. Been down since yesterday. And look at the sky, Logan. Really look. I followed his gaze upward. The morning sky was wrong. Not cloudy. Texas skies are often cloudy in September. This was something else. A greenish haze that seemed to rise from the earth itself, like heat shimmer but cold and toxic. The sun looked sickly through it, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. "The Henderson place," Zachary said suddenly. "Sarah called yesterday morning, said their well water turned black overnight. Killed their dog when it drank from the trough." I thought it was just talk, but another shudder ran through the earth. This time I felt it in my bones. The fissure near the burned post stretched wider, connecting to another crack that ran toward the main house. As I watched, a third crack appeared, then a fourth. All of them bleeding that toxic ichor, all of them spreading outward from the ancient stone like veins from a diseased heart. "We have to warn people," I said. "The whole county could be." "How?" Zachary's voice cracked. "Phone lines are down. Radio's been nothing but static since the bleeding started. And who would believe us? Hello, Sheriff Blanchette. Our family's cursed stone is poisoning the earth. He'd have us committed." I wanted to argue, but he was right. Even Jacob, level-headed as he was, would struggle with the truth. And the truth was almost too much for me to accept, even with the evidence spreading across our land like a cancer. The cracks had reached the barn now. I could see the old structure settling as the ground beneath it shifted and cracked. The horses inside were screaming. Not whinnying, screaming. High-pitched sounds of terror that made my skin crawl. When I ran to check on them, I found them pressed against the far wall, eyes rolled back white, foam dripping from their mouths. The barn floor was split by a 6-foot fissure that glowed with a faint green light. The ichor pooled in the crack was thicker here, viscous like motor oil but moving with purpose. It flowed uphill, defying gravity, following patterns that reminded me of the carvings on the bleeding stone. "Logan!" Zachary's voice echoed from outside. "You need to see this." I found him on the porch, binoculars trained on the horizon. When he handed them to me, I saw what had caught his attention. Smoke, lots of it, rising from at least 3 different locations across the county. And not the clean white smoke of controlled burns. This was black, oily, wrong. "The Morrison Ranch," he said, pointing southeast. "The old Garrett place. And that's got to be the water treatment plant near town." All of them burning. Through the binoculars, I could see more. Dark stains spreading across the landscape like spilled ink. Fissures that caught the morning light and reflected it back in colors that shouldn't exist. And movement, things that might have been people but moved wrong, jerky and unnatural. "We have to choose," I said, lowering the binoculars. "Stay here and try to contain this, or run for town and warn everyone we can find." Zachary was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady again. "Grandpierre stayed. When the stone bled in 53, he stayed and fought it. Fixed the wards, kept it quiet for 70 years. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do. And if we fail, then we fail trying to do what's right." He picked up the gas can, still half full. "The other ward posts, we burn them clean, carve new symbols, try to rebuild the barriers. Maybe it's not too late." I wanted to believe him, but as we spoke, the ground beneath the house groaned and shifted. A new crack appeared in the foundation, and through it seeped that familiar black ichor. The smell was getting stronger. Not just sweet and rotten now, but sulfurous, like eggs left to putrefy in summer heat. "The stone's not just bleeding anymore," I said. "It's calling to something deep underground." Zachary nodded grimly. "Then we'd better work fast." We spent the next hour moving from post to post, burning away the corrupted wood and carving fresh ward symbols with his pocket knife. The work was exhausting. The wood seemed to resist the blade, and the smoke from the fires made our eyes water and our throats burn. But we pressed on, driven by the knowledge that our family had stood guard over this thing for generations. By noon, we'd restored 5 of the 8 ward posts. The fissures had stopped spreading, at least temporarily. The black ichor still flowed, but slower now, as if encountering resistance. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. Then we heard the sound from the north pasture. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder. But thunder doesn't last for 10 minutes straight, and it doesn't make the ground vibrate like a tuning fork. This was something else, something vast and hungry, stirring in the deep places beneath our land. The stone, I said. We ran toward the north pasture, following the sound. What we found there made my blood freeze. The bleeding stone was gone. Not destroyed, gone. In its place was a pit, perfectly circular, so deep that our flashlights couldn't find the bottom. The walls were smooth as glass, carved with spirals and angles that hurt to look at directly. And from the depths rose that terrible sound, no longer rumbling but roaring, like a wounded animal the size of a mountain. "Oh God," Zachary whispered. "Oh God, what's coming up?" The answer came as the ground shuddered again, harder this time. Cracks radiated outward from the pit in all directions, splitting the earth like a spider's web. The black ichor didn't just seep from these new fissures. It fountained up, spraying into the air in gouts that hissed and steamed when they hit the ground. And in the distance, barely visible through the toxic haze, I saw movement. Something large and dark climbing up from the depths, using the carved spirals as handholds. Something that should never have been woken. "The truck," I said. "We need the truck. Now." But even as we ran, I knew it was too late. The barriers had failed. The thing our ancestors had kept sleeping for generations was stirring, and we were the ones who had broken its chains. The earth roared with blood and poison, and something ancient and terrible began its long climb toward the surface. Day 5, September 19th. Written in unsteady handwriting, ink blotted with what appears to be blood. Made it to town. Barely. The whole county is coming apart. Jacob's organizing evacuations, but half the roads are impassable. The fissures have spread beyond our property now, cutting across highways and splitting farmhouses in half. The toxic haze is so thick you can taste it, and the emergency broadcast system has been nothing but static since yesterday. Found Jackson Rousseau at the diner, chain-smoking and staring at geological survey maps. When he saw me, his face went white. "You're from the Delorme place," he said. "Jesus Christ, what did you people do?" I wanted to ask him the same question, because according to Zachary, those drilling crews were surveying our land 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks before the stone started bleeding. Something tells me Jackson Rousseau knows more than he's letting on. End of entry, day 5. Note found tucked between pages. "Logan, the thing in the pit is climbing. I can hear it clawing against the stone. The last 3 ward posts are holding, but not for long. If I don't make it, tell Jacob to evacuate everyone south of the river." Z. Day 6, September 20th. The drilling woke something that should have stayed buried. Jackson Rousseau found me at the Red Rock Diner this morning, his hands shaking as he spread geological survey maps across the Formica table. Coffee stains and cigarette ash couldn't hide the truth laid out in those precise lines and measurements. The Nexus Energy Corporation had been planning this for months. "I need to show you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something that's going to make you want to kill me." The maps were detailed beyond anything I'd seen. Not just surface topography, but deep core samples, seismic readings, and geological formations stretching down thousands of feet. Red circles marked drilling sites across 3 counties. Our property was dead center, marked with a notation that made my blood run cold. "Anomalous geological formation priority alpha. Extreme caution advised." "We knew," Jackson said, lighting another cigarette with the stub of his last one. "Christ help me, we knew there was something down there. The seismic readings were all wrong. Sound waves that bounced back in patterns that shouldn't exist. Temperature fluctuations that defied every model we had. But you drilled anyway." "Not drilled, probed. Just enough to take samples, test the rock composition." His hands were shaking worse now. The first core sample came up warm. Not just warm, hot, like it had been sitting in an oven. And the rock, Jesus, Logan, the rock was carved. Carved on the inside, in patterns that spiraled down deeper than our equipment could reach. I remembered the carvings on the bleeding stone, those same spirals and angles that hurt to look at directly. "What did you do with the samples?" shipped them to the lab in Houston. But 3 days later, the lab called us in a panic. The samples had started bleeding. Not sweating moisture, bleeding. Thick, black fluid that ate through the storage containers like acid. The entire lab had to be evacuated. Outside the diner, a low rumble shook the windows. Not the familiar sound of the pit anymore, this was different. Multiple sources coming from different directions. The toxic haze had thickened overnight, turning the mid-morning sun into a sickly green disk that cast everything in diseased light. "There's more," Jackson continued. "The company didn't stop with your property. They've been surveying the whole region, looking for similar formations. And they found them, lots of them, all connected underground, like a network of veins feeding into a central heart." He pulled out another map, this one showing the entire county. Red dots marked dozens of locations: the Henderson Ranch, the Morrison Place, the old Garrett Farm. All the places where smoke had been rising yesterday. All the places where the earth was splitting open. "It's not just one creature," I said, understanding flooding through me like ice water. "It's a whole ecosystem, a whole colony of these things connected underground. And we woke them all up." Jackson's voice cracked. "Every probe, every core sample, every seismic test. We were feeding them, giving them what they needed to grow stronger. The blood from the lab samples. It was like a dinner bell, calling them up from the deep places." The rumbling outside grew louder. Through the diner windows, I could see people running down Main Street, their faces pale with terror. Someone was screaming about the grain elevator, about something crawling up from the foundation. "The company knew this would happen," I said. "They knew, and they did it anyway." "Not the company. The board. A select group of executives who call themselves the Crimson Convergence." Jackson's cigarette had burned down to his fingers, but he didn't seem to notice. "They're not trying to extract oil, Logan. They're trying to feed the things below. They believe that if they can control the creatures, they can harness their power." "Control them how?" "Blood sacrifice. Lots of it." The lab reports talked about cellular activity increasing exponentially when exposed to fresh blood. The creatures aren't just mindless beasts, they're intelligent, ancient, and they're hungry for more than just flesh. Jacob Blanchette burst through the diner doors, his sheriff's uniform torn and stained with something that wasn't mud. "Logan, thank God you're here. We need to evacuate everyone south of the river." The grain elevator collapsed, and there's something... He stopped, noticing Jackson. "What's he doing here?" "Telling me why this is happening," I said. "Jacob, the drilling company that's been surveying the area, they're not what they seem. They're part of some kind of cult that's been deliberately waking these things up." Jacob's face went through several expressions before settling on grim acceptance. "That would explain the other sites. We've had reports of ground collapses at 7 different locations since yesterday. All of them places where those corporate boys had their equipment set up." "8 now," Jackson said quietly. "I just got word from the Nexus field office. The main pumping station went down this morning. Something came up through the drilling platform, tore it apart like tissue paper. The crew that was supposed to be evacuating, they didn't make it out." The rumbling outside had evolved into something else, a rhythmic pounding like massive footsteps. But not just one set of steps. Multiple creatures moving in coordination. The toxic haze was so thick now that I could barely see across the street. "How many?" I asked. "Based on the seismic readings, at least a dozen. Maybe more. They're all connected by the underground network, sharing information, coordinating their movements." Jackson pulled out a handheld device covered in blinking lights. "This is a modified seismograph. Look at the readings." The screen showed waves of activity crisscrossing the county like a spider's web. Each pulse corresponded to another rumble, another footstep, another creature clawing its way to the surface. And at the center of it all, the strongest signal coming from the pit on our property. "The Alpha," Jacob said, understanding immediately. "The big one. The others are waiting for it to fully emerge." "How long do we have?" I asked. Jackson consulted his readings. based on the rate of ascent. Maybe 6 hours, maybe less. Once it reaches the surface, the others will follow. And then, he didn't need to finish. We all knew what would happen then. We need to get everyone out, Jacob said. Every person south of the river, maybe further. This isn't just a local disaster anymore. It's regional, maybe statewide. The communication lines are down, I pointed out. How do we coordinate an evacuation without phones or radio? We don't. Jacob's voice was steady, but his eyes showed the strain. We save who we can, and we hope the state authorities figure out what's happening before it spreads beyond Texas. Another rumble, closer this time. Through the diner windows, I could see the abandoned gas station across the street splitting down the middle. Black ichor fountained up from the crack, spraying across the street in arterial patterns that pulsed with that familiar heartbeat. There's something else, Jackson said. Something the Crimson Convergence doesn't know. The lab found traces of other substances in the core samples. Organic compounds that don't match any known life forms. But they do match something else. Something that was documented by early settlers in this area. He pulled out a manila folder, thick with photocopied documents. Historical records from the 1800s. Testimonies from ranchers and farmers about strange occurrences. Livestock disappearing. Ground bleeding. People reporting dreams about things climbing up from underground. I recognized the handwriting on some of the documents. These are from our family records. How did you get these? The company's been collecting historical data for months, trying to understand what they were dealing with. Your great-great-grandmother wasn't the first to encounter these things. There have been incidents going back generations. Small awakenings, quickly contained by people who knew what they were dealing with. The ward carvings, I said. The protective barriers. Other families had them too. Not just families, entire communities. Look at this. He showed me a map from 1889, showing the locations of settlements across the county. Most of them were abandoned now, but the pattern was clear. They formed a rough circle around the area where the strongest seismic activity was occurring. They were guard posts, Jacob said. Whole towns dedicated to keeping these things asleep. And now those towns are gone. The people who knew how to maintain the barriers are dead or scattered. We're on our own. The rumbling had become constant now, a background vibration that made the diner's windows rattle in their frames. Outside, the toxic haze was so thick that streetlights had come on automatically, casting sickly pools of light that revealed more than I wanted to see. Shapes were moving in the haze. Large shapes, walking upright but wrong, like someone trying to remember how human movement worked. And there were sounds, not roars or growls, but something worse. Something that might have been laughter, if laughter could be made of grinding stone and spilled blood. We need to get back to the ranch, I said. Check on Zachary. See if any of the ward posts are still holding. Logan, Jacob said carefully. I got a call from your neighbor this morning, Mrs. Henderson. She said she saw your brother walking toward the pit around midnight. But he was walking wrong, like he was sleepwalking, or like something else was controlling his movements. My blood turned to ice. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe your brother isn't your brother anymore. Maybe whatever's in that pit has been reaching out, claiming people. And maybe going back to the ranch is exactly what it wants us to do. The lights went out. Not just in the diner, everywhere. The entire town plunged into darkness, lit only by the sickly green glow of the toxic haze and the pulsing light from the growing fissures. In the darkness, something massive moved past the diner windows. Something that walked on too many legs and breathed with the sound of grinding stone. It's too late, Jackson whispered. They're already here. Day 7, September 21st. Written by candlelight, paper stained with ash and what appears to be tears. The town is lost. Jacob's organizing a convoy to evacuate survivors, but most of the roads are impassable. The creatures, there are at least 6 of them in the immediate area, seem to be hurting us, driving us toward specific locations. I'm going back to the ranch, not because I think I can stop what's coming, but because I need to know what happened to Zachary. and I need to understand what the Crimson Convergence is really trying to accomplish. Jackson gave me coordinates for their field headquarters, about 15 miles south of town. If I can get there, maybe I can find a way to stop the feeding process. Maybe I can cut the head off the snake before it swallows the whole state. The Alpha is almost to the surface now. I can feel it in my bones, a presence so vast and hungry that it makes the earth itself tremble. When it emerges, the others will follow. And then God help us all. But first, I need to go home. I need to see what's left of my family, and what's left of the barriers our ancestors died to maintain. The ward posts are still burning in the distance. Maybe there's still time. Maybe there's still hope. End of entry day 7. Note found paperclip to this page. Logan, if you're reading this, stay away from the ranch. The thing that looks like your brother isn't him anymore. Has been asking for you. Asking by name. JB, day 8, September 22nd. The plains drowned in blood while the earth gave birth to nightmare. I should have listened to Jacob's warning. I should have stayed away from the ranch. But blood calls to blood, and something in my bones demanded I witness what my family's land had become. The thing wearing Zachary's face was waiting for me in the Kit Kingston, sitting at our grandmother's table like nothing had changed. Same flannel shirt, same work boots, same scar across his left knuckle from when he'd tangled with barbed wire as a kid. But his eyes reflected light like an animal's, and when he smiled, his teeth were stained black with ichor. "Been waiting for you, brother," he said, and his voice was Zachary's voice, but underneath it was something else, something that sounded like grinding stone and spilled blood. "The Convergence wants to meet you." "Where's my brother?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The real Zachary was somewhere deep underground, feeding the network of veins that connected every creature across 3 counties. What sat at the table was just a shell, a puppet made of flesh and bone and childhood memories. "I am your brother," it said, tilting its head at an angle that made my stomach turn. "Just improved, enhanced." The old Zachary was weak, Logan, afraid of his own shadow. This version is stronger. Outside, the toxic haze had thickened to the consistency of soup. Through the Kit Kingston windows, I could see shapes moving in the green murk. Not the massive creatures I'd expected, but human figures walking in perfect formation. Dozens of them, all moving toward the ranch house with mechanical precision. "The Convergence," not Zachary said, following my gaze. "They're eager to meet the last of the ward keepers. You're something of a celebrity in their circles." The first figure emerged from the haze, and I recognized him immediately. Marcus Fizet, the Nexus Energy Field Supervisor who'd been coordinating the drilling operations. His expensive suit was torn and stained with ichor, and his left arm hung at an impossible angle, but he walked with the same measured pace as the others. Behind him came more familiar faces. Sarah Martinez from the county clerk's office, Tom Brennan who ran the hardware store, Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch. All of them moving with that same mechanical precision. All of them staring at the house with eyes that reflected the sickly green light. "They volunteered," not Zachary said. "Once they understood what the Convergence was offering, they couldn't sign up fast enough. Immortality, Logan, perfect health, freedom from pain, from fear, from the crushing weight of human consciousness." "They're dead," I said. "All of them. They're evolved. The creatures below don't just feed on flesh. They feed on experience, on memory, on the electrical patterns that make each person unique. And in return, they offer partnership, symbiosis, a chance to be part of something greater than yourself." The first of the Convergence members had reached the porch. I could hear their footsteps on the wooden boards, a rhythmic pounding that matched the heartbeat I'd been hearing from the pit. Through the Kit Kingston windows, I could see dozens more figures emerging from the haze, all walking toward the house with that same terrible purpose. "What do you want?" I asked. "Your cooperation," not Zachary said. "The ward posts are still holding, barely. The protective barriers your family carved into the stone are preventing the Alpha from fully emerging. But those barriers are old, Logan. They're failing. And when they fall, the creatures will spread beyond Texas, beyond the Southwest, beyond anything humanity can contain. Then why not just wait? Why involve me at all? Because waiting is inefficient. The convergence has a schedule to keep. Corporate deadlines, you understand. The board of directors is expecting results, and they're not patient people. Not Zachary's smile widened, showing more of those black-stained teeth. But if the last ward keeper were to voluntarily disable the barriers to welcome the Alpha into the world, well, that would accelerate the timeline considerably. The front door opened without anyone touching it. The Convergence members filed into the house in perfect silence, their movements synchronized like a dance they'd rehearsed 1,000 times. I recognized all of them. Neighbors, friends, people I'd known my entire life, but their faces were blank, empty, as if someone had erased everything that made them human and replaced it with something else. Marcus Fizet stepped forward, his broken arm swinging loosely at his side. When he spoke, his voice was the same grinding stone sound I'd heard from not Zachary, but multiplied, as if dozens of voices were speaking in unison. Logan Delorme, he said, last of the ward keepers, grandson of Marie-Claire Delorme, who carved the first protective barriers in 1889, great-grandson of Jean-Baptiste Delorme, who sealed the northern passages in 1863. We have waited so long to meet you. You're not Marcus Fizet, I said. You're not any of these people. We are all of these people, the collective voice replied. Every memory, every skill, every moment of their lives. We preserve them, honor them, make them part of something eternal. Death is just a transition, Logan. A doorway to perfect understanding. Behind the Convergence members, the Kit Kingston was filling with that familiar black ichor. It seeped through the floorboards, dripped from the ceiling, pooled in the corners like spilled oil. But unlike the corrosive fluid I'd seen before, this seemed almost gentle, almost welcoming. The Alpha is magnificent, not Zachary said, his voice full of religious awe. Older than your civilization, older than your species. It remembers when this land was covered by ancient seas, when creatures the size of mountains walked the earth. And it wants to walk again, Logan. It wants to stretch its limbs, to feel sunlight on its skin, to taste the wind. It wants to feed, I said, on everyone, on everything. It wants to live. Is that so wrong? The collective voice of the Convergence was growing stronger, more resonant. For millions of years, it has been trapped underground, dreaming of the surface, dreaming of freedom. And now, finally, it has the chance to wake up. Through the windows, I could see the pit on our property beginning to glow with that same sickly green light. The earth around it was bulging upward, as if something massive was pressing against it from below. The toxic haze was thickening, and in its depths, I could see more shapes moving. Not human figures this time, but something else. Something vast and many-legged and hungry. Jacob Blanchette is organizing an evacuation, I said. By now, half the county is fleeing north. Your feeding schedule is going to be interrupted. Sheriff Blanchette is dead, Marcus Fizet said, his broken arm twitching with mechanical precision. He died trying to save the children at the elementary school. Very heroic, very noble, very pointless. The words hit me like a physical blow. Jacob, steady, reliable Jacob who'd been trying to hold the community together, was gone. Another friend, another ally, another person who tried to stand against the darkness and paid the price. He didn't die alone, not Zachary said, as if reading my thoughts. 37 people died with him when the school collapsed. But don't worry, Logan. They're all part of the Convergence now. Their children, their families, their hopes and dreams. All preserved, all eternal. The black ichor was rising now, pooling around my ankles. It was warm, almost body temperature, and it moved with a purpose that felt disturbingly organic. I tried to step back, but my boots stuck to the floor as if the fluid had suddenly turned to glue. The Alpha is almost ready, the collective voice said. The barriers are failing, the network is complete, and the feeding cycle is about to begin. But it would prefer to emerge with your blessing, Logan. It would prefer to have the last wart keeper welcome it into the world. And if I refuse, then you'll watch as it tears through the barriers anyway. You'll watch as it spreads across the continent, consuming everything in its path. You'll watch as your refusal dooms millions of people to a death that could have been avoided. Or, not Zachary said, you can choose to be part of something greater. You can choose to help the Alpha achieve its full potential. You can choose to save humanity by helping it evolve. The ichor was up to my knees now, and I could feel it beginning to seep through my jeans. Where it touched my skin, there was a tingling sensation, not unpleasant, like warm honey mixed with electricity. And with that sensation came whispers, not words, exactly, but impressions, images, memories that weren't mine. I saw the Alpha as it truly was, not a monster but a gardener, carefully tending a crop that had been growing for millions of years. I saw the creatures of the network not as predators but as caretakers, each one responsible for maintaining the delicate balance that kept the ecosystem healthy. I saw the convergence not as victims but as partners, willing participants in a grand experiment that would elevate humanity to a higher form of existence. And I saw myself, standing in the Kit Kingston of my childhood home, making the choice that would determine the fate of everything I'd ever known. The barriers are failing anyway, Marcus Vizit said, his collective voice now gentle, almost hypnotic. The Alpha will emerge whether you help it or not. The only question is whether humanity will be ready when it does. The ichor was up to my waist now, and the tingling had become something else. A warmth that spread through my entire body, a sense of connection to something vast and ancient and patient. I could feel the Alpha's presence in the pit, could sense its eagerness to finally taste the surface world after so many millennia of waiting. What about the people who are fleeing? I asked. The ones who don't want to be part of your evolution? They'll be given the choice, not Zachary said. Just as you're being given the choice now. Join willingly or be absorbed when the Alpha spreads beyond the barriers. Either way, they'll become part of something greater than themselves. And if I say no, then you'll die as your brother died. Slowly, painfully, feeling every moment as the Alpha takes what it needs from your body and your mind. But your death won't stop what's coming, Logan. It will only make it more difficult for everyone else. The ichor was up to my chest now, and I could feel it beginning to affect my thoughts. The whispers were getting louder, more insistent, showing me visions of a world where humanity had evolved beyond the need for individual consciousness, where every person was connected to every other person through the vast network that stretched beneath the earth. It was beautiful in its own way, peaceful. No more loneliness, no more fear, no more uncertainty. Just the calm certainty of being part of something eternal. But it wasn't human. Whatever these things were offering, it wasn't humanity. It was something else wearing humanity's face. I need to think about it, I said, though thinking was becoming increasingly difficult. Give me time to consider your offer. Time is running out, the collective voice said. The Alpha grows impatient. The barriers are failing. Soon, the choice will be made for you. The ichor reached my neck, and suddenly I could breathe it. Not drowning, but breathing the thick, warm fluid as if it were air. And with each breath, I could feel more of my individual consciousness slipping away, replaced by something larger and more connected. Logan, not Zachary said, his voice now coming from inside my head as well as outside. Let go. Stop fighting. Join us. And for a moment, I almost did. The temptation was overwhelming, to just let go, to become part of the vast network, to never have to make another difficult choice or face another loss, to be connected to everyone and everything, to understand my place in the grand design. But then I thought about Jacob dying to save those children. I thought about Jackson sacrificing himself to reveal the truth about the convergence. I thought about the real Zachary, not the puppet wearing his face, but the brother who'd taught me to ride a horse and shown me how to carve ward posts and died trying to protect our family's land. And I thought about the ward posts themselves, still burning in the distance, still holding the barriers that our ancestors had died to maintain. "No," I said, and the word came out as a bubble of air in the thick ichor. "I won't help you. I won't be part of this." The collective voice sighed, a sound like wind through broken glass. "Then you've chosen the hard path, Logan. For yourself and for everyone else." The ichor began to drain away, flowing out through cracks in the floor that hadn't been there moments before. As it receded, I could see the Convergence members filing out of the house with the same mechanical precision they'd shown entering. But their faces were different now, disappointed, almost sad. "The Alpha will emerge tomorrow," Not Zachary said, his voice returning to the grinding stone sound. "With or without your help. But it will remember your refusal, Logan. It will remember that the last ward keeper chose to oppose it rather than welcome it. And it will make sure that your death is instructive to others." "Good," I said, though my voice was shaking. "Let it remember. Let it know that some people will never stop fighting." Not Zachary smiled, and for just a moment, I could see something of the real Zachary in his eyes. A flicker of gratitude, maybe, or relief. Then the moment passed, and he was just another puppet again. "The barriers will fall at dawn," he said. "And when they do, the Alpha will spread across the continent like a wildfire. You could have prevented that, Logan. You could have made the transition peaceful. Instead, you've chosen to make it war." The last of the Convergence members disappeared into the toxic haze, leaving me alone in the Kit Kingston with the smell of ichor and the sound of grinding stone. Outside, the pit was glowing brighter, and I could hear something massive moving beneath the earth. Tomorrow, the Alpha would emerge. Tomorrow, the barriers would fall. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, the ward posts were still burning. Tonight, the barriers were still holding. Tonight, I was still human, still free, still able to choose my own path. I gathered up my grandfather's journal, the maps Jackson had given me, and what supplies I could carry. The Convergence had shown me their plan, had offered me a place in their new world. But they'd also shown me something else. They were afraid. Afraid of the barriers, afraid of the ward posts, afraid of the knowledge that my family had passed down through generations, which meant there was still hope, still a chance to stop what was coming. The Nexus Energy Field headquarters was 15 miles south. If I could get there, if I could find a way to disrupt their operation, maybe I could buy time for the evacuations. Maybe I could find a way to strengthen the barriers instead of destroying them. It was a long shot, probably a suicide mission, but it was the only choice I had left. As I walked away from the ranch house, I could feel the Alpha's attention on me, vast and patient and hungry. It knew I was coming. It knew I was planning to fight, and I think it was looking forward to the challenge. End of entry, day 8. Note found attached to this page. Logan, the radio tower is still working. Got word to the National Guard. They're coming. Hold on. JB's deputy. Second note, different handwriting. Radio tower destroyed. Guard convoy turned back. You're on your own. God help us all. Final note, barely legible. The Alpha rises at dawn. The earth weeps for what comes next. Day 9, September 23rd, dawn. Zachary's blood fed the stones, and I knew the beast would rise. The Nexus Energy Field headquarters was a monument to corporate arrogance. A gleaming complex of prefabricated buildings and satellite dishes rising from the poisoned earth like a metallic tumor. But by the time I reached it, the arrogance had curdled into something else entirely. The main compound was crawling with Convergence members, their movements coordinated with mechanical precision. They transformed the drilling facility into something that looked more like an altar than an industrial site. The central platform, where the primary bore hole descended into the earth, had been carved with spiraling symbols that hurt to look at directly. Fresh blood, human blood, channeled through carved grooves into the pit below. I counted at least 50 bodies arranged around the platform in concentric circles. Not corpses, living people. Their wrists opened with surgical precision, their blood feeding the ever-hungry stone. Some I recognized. The Methodist minister from town, the high school principal, the librarian who'd helped me research our family history. all of them staring at the pit with expressions of religious ecstasy, watching their life drain away drop by drop. Beautiful, isn't it? I spun around to find Jackson Rousseau standing behind me, but like my brother, this wasn't the man I'd known. His surveyor's clothes were stained with ichor, and his eyes reflected the sickly green light rising from the pit. But unlike the other Convergence members, he seemed to retain some fragment of his original personality. "Jackson," I said, "when did they take you?" "Yesterday, after I gave you the maps. I thought I was being clever, feeding you information while staying hidden. But they knew I was there all along. They wanted me to tell you about the underground network, about the connected sites. They wanted you to understand the scope of what's coming." "Why?" "Because fear makes the blood taste better." His smile was sad, apologetic. "The Alpha doesn't just feed on flesh and bone, Logan. It feeds on emotion, on desperation, on the kind of terror that comes from knowing you're completely powerless. Your fear, your grief, your rage. It's all seasoning for the feast." Around the platform, the circle of blood donors was growing. More people emerged from the compound buildings, walking with that same mechanical precision, taking their places in the expanding spiral. I recognized the postal clerk, the bank manager, the woman who ran the antique shop. An entire community, voluntarily bleeding themselves to death to feed something that should never have been woken. "The real Jackson is still in here," the thing wearing his face said, tapping his temple with a finger that bent at impossible angles. "He's screaming, actually. Has been since they brought him in. But he's also fascinated by the process. Part of him wants to understand how the integration works, how the creatures preserve and utilize human consciousness." "Let him go," I said, though I knew it was pointless. "He doesn't deserve this. None of them deserve this. But deserve has nothing to do with it. The Alpha is hungry, Logan. It's been hungry for millions of years. And now it's finally close enough to the surface to feed properly." The pit was glowing brighter now, and I could see something massive moving in its depths. Not rising exactly, but shifting, positioning itself for the final push to the surface. The blood from the spiral of donors was flowing faster, pooling in the carved channels before disappearing into the earth below. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Minutes, maybe. The barriers are failing faster than anticipated. Your family's ward posts are strong, but they're not infinite. Each drop of blood that goes into the pit weakens them a little more. Then I need to stop the feeding." "You can't." Jackson's voice was matter-of-fact, almost gentle. "There are too many of them, and they're not going to just let you walk up and unplug the drain. But there is something else you can do." He pointed toward the main compound building, where a figure in an expensive suit was directing the ceremony. I recognized him immediately, Dr. Harrison Blackwood, the Nexus Energy CEO who'd been featured in the local newspaper when the drilling project was first announced. But like the others, he'd been changed. His movements were too fluid, too precise, and his eyes held that same reflective quality. "He's the primary conduit," Jackson explained, "the Alpha's main connection to the surface world. As long as he's alive and functional, the creature can coordinate its emergence, can control the timing and the scale of the feeding. But if something were to happen to him, the Alpha would emerge anyway," I said, "just less controlled, more chaotic." "Exactly. And chaos is the enemy of efficiency. The Convergence has spent months preparing for this moment, timing every aspect of the ritual to maximize the Alpha's power when it reaches the surface. If you disrupt their carefully laid plans, I buy time for the evacuations. Maybe save some lives. Maybe. Or maybe you just make the whole thing worse. The Alpha doesn't particularly care about collateral damage, Logan. If it emerges in a rage, it might decide to consume everything within a 100-mile radius just to be safe." The blood spiral was nearly complete now, and I could see the pit beginning to bulge upward, as if something enormous was pressing against the earth from below. The toxic haze was so thick that the emergency lighting had come on, casting everything in a hellish red glow. "There's another option," Jackson said quietly. Something the convergence doesn't want you to know about. Your family's ward posts, they're not just barriers. They're also weapons. If you can get to the primary post, the one your great-great-grandmother carved in 1889, you can reverse the flow. What do you mean? Instead of keeping the alpha contained, you can use the network to drain its power. Force it back underground, maybe permanently. But the cost? What cost? The ward posts are powered by life force, Logan. By the accumulated energy of everyone who's ever lived and died on this land. To reverse the flow, to push something as powerful as the alpha back into the earth, you'd need to feed the posts everything. Every person, every animal, every living thing within the network's range. I stared at him, understanding slowly dawning. Including myself, including yourself. The last ward keeper using his own life to power the final barrier. It's poetic in a way, but it would work. The alpha would be forced back underground, sealed for another few million years. Humanity would be safe, and everyone in 3 counties would die. Everyone in 3 counties is going to die anyway, Logan. The question is whether they die feeding the alpha or die stopping it. A new sound cut through the air. Not the grinding stone voice of the convergence, but something else. A roar that seemed to come from the earth itself, so deep and powerful that it made my bones vibrate. The pit was glowing like a green sun now, and I could see something massive pushing up through the opening. It's starting, Jackson said. The alpha is making its move. The circle of blood donors suddenly collapsed, all 50 of them hitting the ground simultaneously as the last of their life drained away. But instead of flowing into the pit, their blood began to move upward, streaming into the air in defiance of gravity, forming complex patterns that pulsed with organic light. The summoning circle, Jackson explained. The alpha doesn't just need blood, it needs the patterns, the symbols, the geometric relationships that define the boundary between this world and the deep places. Your ancestors understood this. That's why their ward posts were so effective. The massive shape in the pit was rising faster now, and I could see details that made my mind reel. It wasn't a creature in any sense I understood. It was more like a living landscape, a piece of some alien geography that had been compressed and folded to fit in the underground chambers. But as it rose, it was unfolding, expanding, revealing its true scale. Jesus Christ, I whispered. Close, Jackson said, but older, much older. The thing that emerged from the pit was the size of a city block, its skin a patchwork of stone and flesh that pulsed with veins of molten light. It had no face, no obvious sensory organs, but I could feel its attention settling on me like a physical weight. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of continents shifting. Ward Keeper, it said, and the words made the air itself bleed. You have chosen to oppose us. I've chosen to protect what's mine, I said, though my voice sounded pathetically small in comparison. What is yours is already ours. Your brother understands this. He accepted his role in the great work. The alpha gestured with one massive appendage, and I saw him. The real Zachary, not the puppet that had been wearing his face, but my actual brother. He was embedded in the creature's flesh. His body merged with the alien stone in a way that should have been death but clearly wasn't. He was still alive, still conscious, still aware of what was happening to him. Logan, he said, his voice carrying impossible distances. I can feel it. The network, the connections. Everything is connected. Everything is part of the same system. The alpha isn't a monster. It's a gardener. It's been tending this world for millions of years, and we're just the latest crop. That's not gardening, I said. That's parasitism. The distinction is meaningless, the alpha replied. We take what we need. We give what we choose. The balance is maintained. What about free will? What about the right to choose? Choice is inefficient. Choice leads to waste, to conflict, to suffering. We offer unity. We offer purpose. We offer eternity. The alpha began to move, its massive bulk flowing out of the pit like living concrete. Where it touched the ground, the earth changed, becoming something that was neither fully stone nor fully flesh. Buildings dissolved and reformed, their structural materials integrated into the creature's expanding body. "The primary ward post," Jackson said urgently. "It's about 2 miles northeast, on the ridge overlooking the valley. If you can get there before the Alpha fully emerges." "I can reverse the flow," I said. "Drain its power back into the earth." "You can try. But Logan, once you start the process, there's no stopping it. The ward post will take everything, your life, your memories, your soul. You'll become part of the barrier, just like your ancestors." "Will it work?" "I don't know. The Alpha is stronger than anything your family faced before. It might be too powerful to force back underground, but it's the only chance left." The Alpha was fully emerged now, its body spreading across the landscape like a living stain. I could see other figures moving within its flesh. Not just Zachary, but dozens of people, all of them preserved in the amber of alien stone. All of them still conscious, still aware. "Logan," Zachary called out, his voice full of desperate urgency. "The ward post isn't just a weapon. It's a recording device. Everything our family learned, everything they discovered about the creatures, everything they knew about how to fight them. It's all stored in the stone. If you can access it, I can what? You can learn how they really defeated the Alpha before. Not by forcing it underground, but by changing the rules of the game entirely." "Enough!" the Alpha roared, and the sound shattered windows for miles around. "The Ward Keeper will join us now, or watch as we consume everything he holds dear." The creature began to move toward me, its massive bulk flowing across the ground with impossible speed. But as it moved, I could see the ward posts in the distance beginning to glow brighter, their ancient carvings pulsing with desperate light. The barriers were still holding. Barely, but holding. I ran. The landscape around me was transforming as the Alpha's influence spread. Trees became twisted sculptures of bone and stone. The ground itself pulsed with organic rhythms. The sky turned the color of infected blood, and the air tasted of copper and decay. But ahead, on the ridge, I could see the primary ward post. It was exactly as my grandfather had described it. A pillar of carved stone 15 feet high, covered in symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when I looked at them directly. And at its base, a pool of water that reflected not the diseased sky above, but something else entirely. As I got closer, I could see that the pool wasn't water at all. It was liquid starlight, clear and clean and utterly alien. And in its depths I could see faces. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Every ward keeper who had ever lived. Every member of my family who had died protecting this land. All of them still there, still conscious, still watching. "Logan," my grandfather's voice said, rising from the pool like morning mist. "You're just in time, grandpere? But you died when I was 12. Death is just another kind of sleep," he said. "We've been waiting for you. Waiting for the last ward keeper to come home." I knelt beside the pool, and as I did, I could feel the Alpha's attention focusing on me like a burning glass. The creature was less than a mile away now, its bulk flowing over the landscape, consuming everything in its path. "The Alpha," I said. "How do I stop it?" "You don't," my grandfather said. "You transform it. The ward posts aren't weapons, Logan. They're chrysalises. They're designed to turn monsters into something else entirely." "Into what?" "Into protectors. Into gardeners. Into the very thing the Alpha claims to be but isn't." His face was clearer now, more solid. "The creatures that built this network, the ones that came before the Alpha, they understood balance. They took only what they needed, gave back more than they consumed. But the Alpha is different. It's a cancer, a corruption of the original design. So how do I fix it? You feed it truth instead of blood. You feed it love instead of fear. You feed it sacrifice instead of parasitism." My grandfather's hand reached up from the pool, solid and warm and real. "But it has to be a willing sacrifice, Logan. It has to be given freely, with full knowledge of the cost." "What cost?" "Everything. Your life, your memories, your individual existence. But also everything you've ever loved, everyone you've ever cared about. The Alpha will be transformed, but the process will consume every living thing within 100 miles. The network will be reset, the balance restored, but at the cost of an entire generation. I thought about the evacuations, about the thousands of people who had fled north when the emergency began. How many would die? Everyone who stayed, everyone who couldn't or wouldn't leave. Maybe 30,000 people, maybe more. And if I don't do it, the Alpha spreads across Texas, across the continent, across the world. Billions die instead of thousands. But they don't die clean, they become part of the network, conscious but not free, aware but not autonomous. They become cattle, Logan. Eternal cattle. The Alpha was close enough now that I could feel its breath on my neck, a wind that smelled of deep earth and ancient hunger. When I turned around, I could see Zachary's face in the creature's flesh, twisted with desperate hope. "Do it," he said. "Do it now, before it's too late." I looked back at the pool, at my grandfather's face, at the faces of all the ward keepers who had come before me. They were all waiting, all hoping, all ready to make the same sacrifice I was being asked to make. "Will it work?" I asked. "It worked before," my grandfather said. "In 1889, when the first Alpha tried to emerge. But that was a smaller creature, less powerful. This one, I don't know. But it's the only chance left." The Alpha was directly behind me now, its massive bulk blocking out the sky. I could feel its hunger, its eagerness to add me to its collection of conscious cattle. But I could also feel something else, a deep, abiding loneliness. The creature was ancient beyond measure, and it had been alone for most of that time. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to the Alpha, to my grandfather, or to the 30,000 people who were about to die because of my choice. I plunged my hands into the pool of liquid starlight, and the world exploded into light. Day 9, September 23rd, noon. Note: this section written in different handwriting, shakier, as if under extreme duress. The transformation is beginning. I can feel the Alpha's confusion, its rage, its desperate attempt to understand what's happening to it. The network is changing, the connections rewiring themselves according to patterns laid down millions of years ago. Zachary is free. I can see him in the light, his body restored, his mind his own again. But he's fading, becoming part of the pool, part of the collection of ward keepers who guard the transformed network. "It's working," he says, his voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. The Alpha is learning what it means to be a protector instead of a predator. But Logan, the cost, I can feel it. 30,000 lives ending all at once. Not in pain, but in light. Their energy flowing into the pool, into the network, into the transformation that will turn a monster into a guardian. It's beautiful and terrible and necessary. The Alpha is shrinking, condensing, becoming something else. Something that will tend the earth instead of consuming it. Something that will protect the balance instead of destroying it. But I won't be there to see it. I can feel myself dissolving, becoming part of the pool, part of the eternal watch that the ward keepers maintain. My individual existence is ending, but my purpose will continue. This is what my family has always done. This is what we were born for. The light is getting brighter. The transformation is almost complete. I can see the future now, the world as it will be when the Alpha becomes what it was always meant to be. It's a good future, a balanced future, a future worth the price we paid. Zachary is here with me now, and Grandpere and all the others. We're together in the light, and we're watching over the world we saved. It's enough. It's more than enough. From the testimony of Dr. Sarah Kingston, FEMA Emergency Response Coordinator, recorded October 15th, 3 weeks after the Brewster County incident. Official report excerpt, classification, eyes only, subject, post-incident analysis, Brewster County supernatural event. Date, October 15th, 2024. Interviewer, Dr. Sarah Kingston, FEMA Emergency Response. Location, Temporary Command Center, Alpine, Texas. They call it the Brewster County Miracle now. 3 weeks ago, it was the Brewster County apocalypse. I've been working disaster response for 15 years. Hurricanes, wildfires, industrial accidents, even a few incidents the public never hears about. But nothing prepared me for what I found when our team finally got clearance to enter the affected zone. The silence was the first thing that hit you. 30,000 people had lived in that 100-square-mile radius around the Nexus Energy facility. Ranchers, farmers, small-town folks who'd been there for generations. When the emergency broadcast started on September 14th, most of them evacuated. But not all. The official count is 8,847 missing persons. That's what goes in the public record. What doesn't go in the public record is that we know exactly where they are. They're in the light, the transformation zone. The epicenter is still restricted, will be for the foreseeable future. But from the perimeter, you can see what Logan DeLorme's sacrifice accomplished. The Nexus Energy facility is gone. Not destroyed, but transformed. In its place stands something that looks like a cross between a cathedral and a living tree, made of stone that pulses with soft, clean light. The toxic fissures that had been spreading across the landscape? Sealed. Not filled in or paved over, but actually healed. The earth itself reformed, leaving no trace of the venomous scars that had been splitting the plains. The ward posts are still there, 15 of them arranged in a perfect circle around the transformed facility. They burn with that same clean light, day and night, visible from 20 miles away. Local pilots report that the light doesn't show up on instruments. It's only visible to the naked eye, and only if you're looking for it. The survivors. Note: the following testimony was provided by Maria Santos, age 67, rancher from the affected zone. I was supposed to evacuate. My daughter called me 17 times that last day, begging me to drive north to her place in Lubbock. But this land has been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandmother is buried in the family plot behind the old house. I wasn't going to abandon her. When the light came, I thought it was the end. This wave of brightness, washing over everything like a gentle flood. But it didn't hurt. Felt welcoming, like coming home after a long journey. I could hear voices in the light. My husband Miguel, who passed 2 years ago. My son Carlos, who we lost in Afghanistan. They were telling me it was okay, that I could stay if I wanted to, that there was a place for me in the light. But they also told me I had a choice. I could join them, become part of the network that protects this land. Or I could stay here in the world of the living and help people understand what had happened. I chose to stay, but I can still hear them sometimes, when the wind blows just right across the ward posts. They're not gone. They're just transformed. They're part of something bigger now, something that watches over this place and keeps it safe. The children's testimony. Note: the following accounts were provided by elementary school students from Alpine, Texas, during standard psychological evaluations. Emma Rodriguez, age 8. The bad thing under the ground was really scared. It didn't want to hurt people, but it was so hungry it couldn't help itself. Like when you're really, really hungry and you eat too much candy and get a tummy ache. The nice man with the light showed it how to eat sunlight instead of people. Now it's not hungry anymore. Marcus Thompson, age 10. My grandpa was one of the people who went into the light, but he visits me sometimes in dreams. He says he's not dead, just different. He says he's helping to keep the monsters away so kids like me don't have to be scared. He says there are other places in the world where the monsters are still hungry, but they're learning how to be nice too. Lily Kingston, age 7. The light people aren't ghosts. Ghosts are sad and lost. The light people are happy because they know they're helping. They're like volunteer firefighters, but for the whole world. The scientific impossibility. Note: the following statement was provided by Dr. James Mitchell, seismologist, University of Texas at Austin. From a geological perspective, what happened in Brewster County shouldn't be possible. We had seismic activity equivalent to a magnitude 8.0 earthquake, but instead of destruction, we got construction. The earth actually reformed itself, creating new topographical features that demonstrate perfect structural integrity. The mineral composition in the affected area has changed too. We're seeing elements that don't exist on the periodic table, stones that generate their own light, water sources that seem to purify themselves. It's as if the fundamental laws of physics have been locally rewritten. The official explanation is unusual geological activity precipitated by deep drilling operations. But between you and me, I think we're dealing with something that science doesn't have words for yet. The network effect. Note: the following observations were compiled from multiple government sources and are classified above my security clearance, but I include them here for completeness. The Brewster County incident wasn't isolated. In the weeks following Logan DeLorme's sacrifice, we've documented similar healing events at 17 locations across North America. All of them sites where historical records indicate previous supernatural incidents. The pattern is consistent. Areas of environmental damage suddenly restore themselves, toxic conditions neutralize overnight, and local populations report a sense of peace and protection. In every case, there are reports of lights in the landscape, often arranged in geometric patterns that correspond to historical ward markers. It's as if the transformation in Texas triggered a cascade effect, awakening dormant protection networks that had been established by indigenous peoples centuries ago. The DeLorme family's ward posts weren't unique. They were part of a continental system that had been broken and is now repairing itself. The ongoing mystery. Note: personal observations, not for official record. The hardest part of this job is knowing that I can't tell people the truth. The official story is that Nexus Energy's drilling operation destabilized underground gas deposits, causing localized seismic activity and forcing temporary evacuations. The 8,847 missing persons are classified as presumed deceased due to structural collapse and toxic gas exposure. But I've seen Maria Santos talking to empty air and getting responses that make perfect sense. I've watched children draw pictures of relatives they've never met, relatives who died decades before they were born. I've stood at the perimeter of the restricted zone and felt the presence of something vast and benevolent watching over the land. The truth is that Logan DeLorme succeeded. He transformed a monster into a guardian, and in doing so, he activated a protection network that's been dormant for generations. The price was terrible, 8,847 lives, but they chose to pay it. They chose to become part of something larger than themselves. And now they're protecting the rest of us. The final entry. Note: this final section was discovered in Logan DeLorme's journal, written in a different hand entirely. The handwriting matches no known samples but appears to be a composite of multiple individuals. From the collective memory of the ward keepers, October 31st, 2024. To whoever finds this journal, to whoever continues our work, we are Logan DeLorme. We are Zachary Gauthier. We are Jacob Blanchette. We are Jackson Rousseau. We are the 8,847 who chose light over darkness, sacrifice over survival, service over self. We are also Maria Santos's husband Miguel, and her son Carlos, and her great-grandmother Elena, who first established the ward posts in this territory. We are generations of protectors, stretching back to the beginning of human memory. We are not dead. We are transformed. The network is healing. The ancient protections are reawakening. The balance is being restored. But the work is not finished. There are other places where the darkness still hungers, other communities that need protection, other guardians who must be awakened. The journal remains. The ward posts burn. The light endures to future generations. Remember that the earth itself is alive, and it needs protectors. Remember that some prices are worth paying. Remember that transformation is always possible, even for the darkest monsters. The network remembers. The network endures. The network protects. We are the ward keepers. We are the light in the darkness. We are the price willingly paid for the world's tomorrow. And we are watching, always watching. If you drive Highway 90 through West Texas today, you might notice something strange about the landscape around mile marker 47. The land is too green, too healthy, too peaceful. Wildlife is abundant in ways that don't match the climate data. The air tastes cleaner than it should. Local tour guides will tell you it's the site of the Brewster County Geological Event of 2024. They'll point out the lights on the horizon, visible only at night, and they'll mention that the area is still technically restricted for environmental monitoring. What they won't tell you is that sometimes, if you listen carefully when the wind blows just right, you can hear voices in the light. Voices of people who chose to become something more than human, something that watches over the land and keeps it safe. The network remembers. The network endures. The network protects. And every night, the ward posts burn with clean light, keeping watch over a world that doesn't know how close it came to ending. The earth weeps venom no more. The light endures.